Welcome aboard.
Introducing Axios senior economics reporter, Courtney Brown.
Hi. Good Tuesday morning. Before we start, I want to ask you to follow along with our conversations today using the hashtag Axios events. Okay, we got that out of the way. Now on to the business ahead. America is in the midst of a pretty profound and fascinating change. There's a lot of innovation in fintech, digital assets, from real-time payments to stable coins. They're all reshaping how your money moves around the world. I think what's so interesting about this moment, and what makes it so different, is the most interest from any president that we've ever seen in this space, and huge stakes in Congress and battles to figure out how to regulate it. So we're going to start this morning with a conversation with a key newsmaker, Congressman Richie Torres from my home state, New York. Hey. All right. Whew. It's so nice to be just sitting next to someone who is from New York.
I appreciate that.
The energy.
You didn't ask me where, though.
The Bronx.
I'm from the Bronx, yeah.
Here's the thing.
Healthy rivalry with Brooklyn.
Here's the thing.
I represent the Yankees, so if you're a Mets fan.
I'll take anything. I will take anything. You know where I want to start? I've been thinking and talking to people about you since I found out I was going to interview you today.
Yeah.
And I hear you're really strange. Like, I mean that in a good way. It's not an insult.
Like the human equivalent of a stablecoin.
So you're saying that backstage. Strange in the sense that you're very pro-technology. You're more of a free thinker on issues like crypto relative to your Democratic colleagues. Would you agree with that?
You know, I see the divide on crypto not so much as ideological as it is generational.
Okay.
Like, I find younger Democrats are far more open to embracing emerging technologies, and it's the gerontocracy that tends to be more resistant to change. You know, there's a fear of the unknown. And look, pessimism about technology is ancient. Like, even Socrates was pessimistic about the advent of writing. And I think it's fair to say writing has been a net good for humanity.
I think so.
You know, there were critics of the internet during its embryonic stages. So I feel like suspicion of technology is deeply rooted in human nature.
Okay, so the headline.
But often misguided.
The headline from this segment is going to be Congressman Torres, down with the olds, right? That's going to be the headline.
No, I'm not ageist at all.
Okay. So you're involved pretty heavily with the stablecoin legislation in the House. It's called, the House version is called Stable. There's a Senate version called Genius. Tell me about...
Very stable genius, right? Yeah.
I didn't want to say it, but you said it. In the last 24 hours, there's been a little bit of a revolt in the Democratic Party over this bill. Why are some of your colleagues worried about Stable?
Well,
Act?
the legislation has merit on its own terms, independently of who's occupying the White House. But there are legitimate concerns about the presidential profiteering from crypto meme coin. So Donald Trump has his own meme coin as well as his own stable coin. I think his cryptocurrency firm has said it's going to issue stable coins that could generate hundreds of millions of dollars in fees and benefits for his family. And then obviously you had a foreign government announce that it was going to use $2 billion, it was going to use his cryptocurrency to engage in $2 billion worth of transactions.
Right, an Emirati firm, right?
So that to me is profoundly unethical, and it should be illegal. And that should be an issue that we address in the legislation. For me, the presidential profiteering from crypto is a product of a deregulated status quo. So I see it as an argument not against regulation, but for it.
So hypothetically, if this bill were to come to a vote today, in its current form, would you vote for it?
I voted for the stablecoin bill, so I would vote for it, but I'm going to continue to advocate for more changes.
Okay. Let's pretend I'm a member of Congress. We talked about the gerontocracy. I wonder how you would tell me when I come to you over concerns about regulating crypto, and if we regulate it, maybe it legitimizes the industry and it facilitates crime. How do you quiet some of those concerns?
Well, suppose I were to tell you there's a technology that kills 40,000 people every year. Your first instincts might be, well, we need to immediately ban that technology. What if I were to tell you it's the automobile? Right? It would be unwise to ban the automobile. Right? The goal of Congress, or the goal of any legislature, should be to create a regulatory framework that makes it safer. And that's the same mindset that we should apply to crypto. Now, it's certainly true that there are malevolent actors who exploit the anonymous nature of crypto to engage in ransomware and tax evasion and sanctions evasion. That's certainly true. But it's equally true that law enforcement can exploit the transparency of blockchain to solve crime and to fight crime. Unlike fiat currency, which is often untraceable, every transaction on the blockchain is radically transparent. Law enforcement was able to recover much of the ransomware in the Colonial Pipeline case because of the radical transparency of blockchain. So you can never judge a technology by its worst possible uses. You have to consider both the best uses and the worst uses. You have to weigh the cost and the benefits. And I'm confident that the benefits of stablecoin will far outweigh the cost. I represent one of the lowest income districts in the country, which has often been left behind by the legacy financial system. There was a study by the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs which found that the lowest income New Yorkers spend more than $200 million a year in check cashing fees. I represent poor people, immigrants, who pay exorbitant fees simply to transfer their own money abroad. For them, stablecoin has the potential to be a game changer because stablecoin can digitize the dollar. Blockchain enables real-time transactions, and the combination of those two technologies, the ability to move the dollar at the speed of the blockchain, can create a better, cheaper, and faster payment system that liberates the lowest income from the long delays and high fees of the traditional financial system. So that's an example of the enormous amount of good that stablecoin can do for an enormous number of people.
What about something like Bitcoin that is more of a speculative asset? I mean, how do you talk to your constituents about that?
Well, look, personally, and as a member of Congress, I refuse to make individual investments, and I refuse to invest in crypto because it just strikes me as unethical to invest in anything that you're actively regulating. So I prefer index funds, but I would never give investment advice to any constituent. But I think of Bitcoin as digital gold. So it's not so much a currency, it's more of a store of value.
Right.
And it's become legitimate. I mean, you had BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world, create an ETF based on Bitcoin. So it's crypto's here to stay. Stablecoin's here to stay. And the question is, we should stop debating the existence of it and start debating how to best regulate it.
I wonder, some of the hesitancy on the part of your Democratic colleagues, how much of that opposition is, good faith concern about stablecoins or Bitcoin or what have you, and how much of it is partisan and kind of a reaction to how supportive the White House is of crypto?
It's both, but keep in mind that my colleagues who are skeptical, their skepticism long predates Donald Trump's latest presidency. It's only intensified by his presidential profiteering from crypto, so it's more the former. But look, Donald Trump poisons and polarizes everything he touches, and I'm concerned that for me the greatest stumbling block to bipartisan legislation on crypto is Donald Trump, because I worry he will polarize the climate for crypto legislation in Congress.
How do you talk to your colleagues across the way there? congressman style. He'll be joining here later. I mean, how do you express those concerns?
I mean, I've conveyed those concerns directly to the chair, French Hill, but I feel strongly that there needs to be language in both the market structure bill and the stablecoin bill that prohibits not only the president, but members of Congress and their families from personally profiting from stablecoins and meme coins.
Have you had any conversations with the White House about?
I have no conversations with the White House.
Well, amazing, because this is a place where you strongly agree with the president, right? This issue.
I mean, on the surface, but I embrace blockchain as an emerging technology that can revolutionize our payment system. As far as I can tell, Donald Trump is not interested in turning America into the crypto capital of the world. He's interested in turning his presidency into a crypto kleptocracy. So I feel like our goals are quite different.
Okay. I'm curious why one of the first big moves Congress is taking is with stable coins. Is it because it's kind of boring, as you say? No memes, no Wall Street bets, just steady Eddie backed by the faith of the U.S. government.
It's the lowest hanging fruit
Okay.
in the world of crypto regulation, and the use case is obvious. And I see the proliferation of dollar stablecoins as a projection of American soft power. It's the greatest export to the world could be dollar stablecoin. You know, we as Americans take for granted a stable currency. It's like the air we breathe. But for much of the world, a stable currency is hard to come by.
Right.
There are billions of people, particularly in the global south, right, who have no access to a stable currency, who are susceptible to runaway inflation. At one point, Venezuela had an inflation rate of more than 53 million%, which is staggering to the human mind. And so dollar stablecoin could be the American dream that liberates the poorest people on earth from runaway inflation. It's the great equalizer, it's the great stabilizer. And it's not only stabilizing to the users, but it's destabilizing to foreign governments that often steal from their own people. Like blockchain protects the property rights of the least propertied. There's Chris Dixon, who's active in the crypto space, draws a distinction between can't be evil and don't be evil. And instead of trusting corrupt foreign governments not to be evil, you can trust the blockchain, which can't be evil because it's code.
I feel like I've heard this argument that stablecoins could be good for the U.S. because it could kind of spin up more demand for U.S. Treasuries.
Yes.
I think I'm worried about that.
At a time when confidence in the dollar has been shaken.
That's what I'm worried about. And I wonder, is it the case that stablecoins could get so big and we have a sell America moment like we had a few weeks ago, and there is disruption in the U.S. Treasury market?
I mean, that's a risk, but I would argue that exponentially expanding demand for U.S. Treasuries is a benefit to the United States because it lowers our borrowing costs. The higher the demand for U.S. Treasuries, the lower the interest we pay on the debt. It's often described as an exorbitant privilege. And the common narrative about crypto, the original narrative, is that it posed an existential threat to the status of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Dollar stablecoins show the opposite, that it's reinforcing rather than challenging the status of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And if it's not the dollar, would you prefer that those stablecoins are pegged to the digital yuan?
Right.
To China's currency or to Russia's currency? Like I prefer, the financial supremacy of the United States.
We have just 90 seconds left. I want to talk to you about something I hear you're quite fond of, which is Italian food.
Yes.
And
I represent Arthur Abbey Little.
Yes, Little Italy in the Bronx. And I've heard that you're very familiar with the restaurants there, know them well. What are the conversations like with those people or any of your other constituents about tariffs and how they're feeling about the risk from tariffs?
The hardest business to run in New York, and maybe anywhere, is a restaurant, because the margins are thin. And Arthur Abbey Little Italy is a remarkable community. It's probably has one of the largest concentrations of businesses that have been owned by the same family for more than 100 years. But these are businesses that are coping with the crushing cost of living, and tariffs is only intensifying just the crushing cost of doing business in a city as expensive as New York. So just about every business to whom I've spoken feels that the tariffs have been deeply destructive.
Do you feel helpless? I mean, all of this action is happening at the executive branch, and I mean, what can you do as a congressman to help?
I wouldn't say I'm helpless. But look, he's the president, but I play the long game, and look, I feel the imperial presidency of Donald Trump is as much a product of congressional capitulation as it is of Donald Trump himself. I feel like we have gone too far in passing too many laws that have concentrated too much power in the executive, and we should return power to the legislature. I mean, Congress is meant to be the first among equals. It's meant to be the primary branch of government. And so we should restore that system of congressional primacy that was envisioned by the founders.
Do you believe the toothpaste, though, can be put back in the tube?
There is damage, there is, but we've overcome, as a country, we've overcome far greater challenges than Donald Trump. So this too shall pass.
Thank you so much,
of course,
Congressman. It's really a great pleasure to have you here with Axios. That's all the time we have. I want to tell you guys, if you like this convo, please sign up for my colleague Brady Dale's bi-weekly must-read Axios crypto newsletter at signup.axios.com. That's also where you can find my newsletter, Axios Macro, that I'm off to go write right now. I ask you to stay seated. We have a few more conversations ahead for you all, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator, Nicholas Johnston.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicholas Johnston. I'm the publisher of Axios. Thank you so much for waking up and spending the morning with us. I love Axios events. They're the manifestation of our journalism. They wouldn't be possible without all of you being here, and they certainly wouldn't be possible without the support of our partners. So hugely grateful for Intuit for making this morning's conversation possible. And as part of that partnership, I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Gerald Carr, the owner and CEO of All Pro Builders and Restorations, and Penny Lee, president and CEO of the Financial Technology Association. Gerald and Penny, welcome to the Axios stage. Good morning. Welcome. Let's start. I'd love to start big picture on all of these. Penny, this first one is going to be for you. As Courtney kicked it off, like, we're in a transformative moment in financial transactions and payments. From your viewpoint, what have been the biggest shifts recently?
Well, I think what you're seeing and what you heard the congressman allude to and what he's saying is kind of where we're moving as far as the movement of money. How is it being transferred, the speed in which it's being interacted. And a lot of the advances that we've seen to date have been on the consumer side. So you have, P2P payment, where you're able to instantly transfer to a friend. On-demand payroll, where you're able to get your wages early, on time, on that day. So I think the next transition that we need to think about, and how U.S. needs to think about their policy, is how it relates to small businesses or businesses in general.
Right.
And I think that's the next wave that we need to take a look at. How do we allow payment companies that have incredible innovation at their fingertips to be able to transfer what they're able to do to small businesses so they can settle their accounts faster, they can get their invoices paid faster, that there is some type of stableness, speed, and transparency to allow these small businesses to function even more effectively and more efficiently. Yeah. So I think that's where we're heading to, and it's just a very large conversation that we need to have here in the United States, is how do we make our systems and what is the regulatory, overlay that we need to enable this faster payment.
So many conversations in Washington can be very theoretical and policy-based. So we are very fortunate to have an actual real-life small businessman here. Gerald, like, bring this into the real world. Like, from your vantage point, how has your business operations changed in the last 5 or 10 years?
Well, in the construction industry, sometimes we move a little bit slower than most people, but we've finally got to the point to where we're no longer working with paper and start digitizing most things. One of the biggest oxymorons was that we were doing green projects, but we killed 100 trees by all the paper that we were using at the time. So what they've allowed and what's gone to some of the major companies is that they've digitized their pay application situations to where we can now go online, click, and process those as opposed to having to go one at a time, and it's made things move a lot faster for us because in most small businesses, we're usually the project manager, we're the accounts receivable, we're the accounts payable. So time within it allows us to do more things in that sense.
Then how does that change the relationship with the people either you're paying or being paid by? Does that smooth things along? Does that bring transparency to the contractor relationship? Can you bring us into a little more specifics?
Yeah, I mean, it's given a little bit more trust in the sense that because cash flow is king to us for small business. So the faster they can get the money, the more they're allowed to do more things with their projects or with their services. So you get that sense of trust. You get that sense of of caring.
Yeah.
And usually what happens is that if you have a supplier or you have a contractor that's not paying you on time, you lose that trust factor, and then now you're not able to move forward.
And because, I mean, is it a factor a little bit of it because you're not cutting down a bunch of trees and filling out a bunch of forms? It moves a little quicker, they can see it coming, and now they understand, okay, Gerald is someone I can work with because I see that money.
Yes, because most of the time, back in the day, it was anywhere from 45 days to 50 days before you get your money. Now we can get it within 30 to 25 days from the time that you put in your invoice.
Right. We spoke to the congressman a lot about I think like U.S. laws and regulation, but there's a global component to this too. Does your business stretch overseas? Have you encountered anything like that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I was working with a contractor, and their headquarters was over in China, and we had given them an invoice, and we were sitting there right around about 30 days that we had not gotten paid. So I called the project manager and I said, sir, we need to get our money. Well, he said, well, we're in a little bit of a dilemma. I said, well, what's the dilemma? He said, it's Chinese New Year. Well, during Chinese New Year, nothing moves. And so what ended up happening was that, well, we can wire you your money to your bank, to your account. Well, the international transaction fees to have a wiring was like, I'd lose all my profits that I had in there.
Right.
And so I would say there's no way that we can do that because we're not going to give up the profits that we made on this project. So then now, being able to digitize and have third-party people to do it, it makes it a lot easier.
You circumvent all those other
circumvent all the other things, yes.
Problems. Penny, to stay internationally, like with a global viewpoint, what can we learn from other countries? Like, what are other people getting right?
Yeah, and what Gerald is also talking about is there are still latent legacies or latent lateness within that own system in that, yes, you can transfer and he can get a wire, but it's still taking 3-4 days to settle. We need to go from the analog days of bank hours only in which we can operate, and we do have rails that are coming online, FedNow, Clearinghouse and other rails, but those are still controlled by the legacy institutions that we have. What we would want to see is that regulated payment companies that are in the movement of money, that are able to transfer globally, be able to settle the remittances, be able to move that money in a way that doesn't have the cost that because going through legacy banks and kind of the slowdown that it has. So what we would say is, as the U.S. thinks about the future of finance, regulated payment companies should have access to Fed services, should have access to master accounts. And we're seeing that in the UK, in Europe, in Singapore, all over the world. You have those systems in place and they're not causing extra risk.
Right.
But what they're doing is allowing these businesses to operate at the highest effectiveness and the highest efficiencies without having to pay tolls all along the rails, all along the pathway.
I mean, to even think of the concept like bank hours, like, what do you mean I can't go to the ATM at 4 o'clock in the morning or transfer
Exactly,
money?
and that's the shift, and especially as it harms on small businesses when you're having to wait either for Chinese New Year, we know that special circumstances, but even waiting 3-4 days for your payroll to have not that certainty of when that payroll or whenever you receive a payment from somebody to know that it still takes a couple of days for it to clear. And so you have, a lot of pressures on your businesses with paying inventory, paying individuals, accepting payments overseas, having a person being able to, if you're in the retail business, being able to settle that credit card immediately into your own accounts. So there's a lot of, control that has happened that is just causing, latency, toll, expensiveness into the system, where I think, where the U.S. should be heading to is where model other countries have to be able to have that ease of payment.
You mentioned a little bit of awareness of risk. I want to touch on that a little bit. How the best way to balance that. Like the Congressman Torres said earlier, like what he was interested in is like the transparency and speed of it is very valuable. What are the concerns you have that we need to be most aware of on the risk side?
Yeah, and I think that we often hear that regulated payment companies are unregulated. It's a wild, wild west. But in fact, there's an incredible amount of federal laws, state laws, you have prudential regulators already into the business of how they operate. And so there are risks. What we want to make sure is that the Fed has already put out guidelines of what it means to be able to have access to Fed services. Here are all the things you need to do as far as, making sure that you have your risk controls, your compliance, a lot of other things. So if you adhere to those values and those stipulations at the Fed, they should be able to allow payment companies into the services.
Gerald, how do you approach this from a risk standpoint, moving from stacks of paper to doing it more online and electronically?
It all boils down to the trust, in that avenue, and that's the great thing about Intuit and QuickBooks. I mean, we already trust them as small businesses. As you see, they have all our financial data. You got consumers doing TurboTax. That those are the most personal things, as one as a consumer, two as a business owner. And so to be able to allow them to be in this space, it gives us that certainty, because they have to rely on our trust, because if not, then they don't have us as a customer. So they're already doing some of these things that are already there, and to allow us to be able to go a little bit further to where the payments and everything can come in and cut down on the cost and everything is where it is.
So before we get the hook here, let's end this on one future thing. Let's spin this forward. Gerald, what's next? What are you most excited for? What do you most want in the next 5 years, maybe from payment processing, to make your life a little easier?
Number one thing, less cost. You look at some people, or you take credit card payments, whatever, the expenses are a little too high. Matter of fact, I talked to a small business owner that I kind of mentor, and they were telling me that just last month they spent $1,500 on transaction fees. So I'd love to see the transaction fees either dwindle or just a one-time cost. It's not a percentage on a dollar, particularly in the construction industry. If I do a $250,000 processing a payment, and they take 2% of that, do the numbers on that.
Yeah, they're going to profit.
That goes to profit. Whereas if it was just a one-time fee just to be able to do it, then that helped. And then the other thing is the quickness of payment. We've got to have money. Cash flow, as we say, cash is king. It's particularly for small businesses to move, and particularly in the construction industry myself, not only is just payroll, but to be able to fund the projects, to mobilize to the next project to keep things moving. So we'd love to see the frequency of.
So the great thing about doing these in DC on these topics is the people who are in charge of this policy are in this room, or at least they think they're in charge of this policy in this room. We got a couple congressmen behind stage. Penny, what's the homework for them?
We have the technology in place, and they need to think through what are the regulatory structures to allow and to unleash this technology, whether it be statutorily and allowing payment companies into the Fed services, whether it be through access into money transmission, or access into the Fed master accounts. So we need to just be able to think creatively or think outside the box, and how do we get it? Because right now, legacy institutions are controlling the process and putting in fees that are unnecessary. And we need to think outside of that box.
Got it. Homework for everybody here. Penny, Gerald, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
To for making today's conversation possible. Stick around. We got a big finish with my colleague, Nathan.
Please welcome to the stage Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey.
Promise this is the last segment. I mean, the future of finance in the morning, maybe not the most scintillating topic, but we're going to try. Like she said, I'm Nathan Bomey. I'm a business reporter at Axios and author of Axios Closer, which is our flagship newsletter on all things business. Our next guest serves on the House Administration Committee and on the Financial Services Committee. He's also a representative from my home state of Wisconsin. Please welcome to the stage Congressman Brian Stile.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, our first interview, I just found out Courtney, my colleague, who's from New York, is interviewing a congressman from New York. So I'm like, does Axios only assign people from the same state to interview people from the same state? But I'm glad that you're here. This is such an interesting conversation. I want to dig right into it. So you, at one point recently, called this the golden age of digital assets. What did you mean by that?
I think we're at an absolute transition point, moving from a Web 2 interface into Web 3. And so if you believe that that journey is shifting from A to B, that means we have to get it right on tokenization, on digital assets, and the framework that which we have used in the past for securities law, for commodities law, doesn't fit the new age. And if we step back and look at what really separates the United States, what separates the US economy from many of our global peers, Western Europe, Japan, Korea, it's that we've dominated in tech and in particular Web 2. So the largest tech companies around the globe, with the exception of TikTok, so put an asterisk there, are domiciled in the United States. And if we look at the economic growth that we have seen, why our productivity is higher than the rest of the globe, why our returns on investments are higher than the rest of the globe, much of that is because we got Web 2 right. To get Web 3 right, you have to get crypto, you have to get digital assets in the legislation right, and that's why I'm of the view that we are at a turning point, and this is going to be essential.
Yeah, I mean, so backstage we were talking about the Green Bay Packers. Like, we're Wisconsinite, you know, like Packers, cheese, things like that. Like, why does a Wisconsinite care about crypto?
Well, most of my mornings are talking about the Packers and cheese, but today is different. No. What again, kind of going back, right? What separates us? And what separates us from the rest of the globe is making sure that we get tech right. And if you think of the opportunities that are going to present themselves in a Web3 environment, blockchain technology underlying that is a real opportunity to democratize the internet. So instead of allowing just a small set of large global tech companies to dominate and hold that value, we're going to see a dissemination of that, again, if we get this right. So if you step back, I don't have a problem with Meta or Amazon or Facebook or Google, et cetera. I have my own concerns, right? But they're going to continue to play. They're legacy players. But if you step back and think that Meta is a $1.5 trillion market cap company making money off of probably almost everybody in this room and everybody that posts photos and information onto their platform, there's an opportunity leveraging blockchain technology to disseminate that value back to everyday Americans. And I think that is really what gets me excited about the technology and a real opportunity to shift from reliance on global corporations into an ownership model.
All right, so you introduced something that Courtney talked about earlier, the Stable Act. I'm gonna see if I can get this right now. Stablecoin transparency and accountability for a better ledger economy. Did you think of that?
No.
Okay. But you say that it needs to focus on, you want to focus on fair, transparent, and predictable rules for stablecoin regulation. What does fair and transparent look like?
Fair and transparent is putting forward a framework that everybody can abide by. And so what we have seen is this dissemination of different types of crypto in other areas. I think there's a need and a hunger to put a regulatory framework in place that will really unlock and allow the broader industry and stablecoins to really grow. And so I think there's a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines watching this play out, in particular regulated entities who are choosing not to enter into this space, in large part because of what we saw over the past 4 years in the Biden administration, in particular the actions of Gary Gensler, and policy was being driven by enforcement action. That's a horrific way to allow policy to be developed. Far better to sit down, design policy to make sure that we are building a roadmap so that capital can come to the table, innovate in this space, and I think it will. And I think people want to know we need reasonable consumer protections. That's part of the transparency piece. Americans who are engaged in this, or people across the globe, should know that stablecoin is actually backed in the manner that it says it is. And if we do this right and people have that trust and confidence in the system, I think what you're going to see is a significant amount of capital coming to the table, significant innovation and development. You'll have consumer protection, and the United States will be in a position to outcompete the rest of the globe.
So much of the conversation in Washington over the last several months has been about deregulation, about removing regulations, all the things that are holding people back. Here you are, a Republican, talking about doing some new regulation. Why not just let it go free?
It's an opportunity, right? So as we think of the bell curve, we have people that are the absolute libertarian, and on the other side, we have an absolute nanny state. My heart's often with the libertarians, and so I'm always cautious when we would come forward and regulate a space. But I do think there's a huge opportunity here to put forward baseline regulations. And again, I think that provides consumer protections, but it also allows businesses and individuals and entrepreneurs to make a decision to invest knowing that that investment won't be taken away by an overzealous regulator. So it's not to say that there's no regulation in this space. We could go back and just look at 4 years of what Gary Gensler did at the SEC. There is regulation in this space. It's regulation through enforcement action in an unstructured manner. And so what I think we're doing is coming to the table and saying the baseline isn't actually a laissez-faire, no regulation environment. The baseline is taking the regulations that are currently on the books and trying to apply it in a digital asset space. And because that fit doesn't work very well, it does one of two things. It either doesn't work and doesn't provide consumer protections, it doesn't provide stability for us to be able to outcompete the rest of the globe, or you empower an individual like Gary Gensler or somebody in the future who comes and makes decisions on their own whim, where one individual can significantly, disproportionately impact an entire industry.
All right, because Gensler is gone now. My understanding is that the SEC, like you say, doesn't really have the oversight authority, nor does the CFTC. Do you want to see either one of those have more authority?
Well, we saw the introduction of the market structure bill that I am very supportive of, led by French Hill and G.T. Thompson. We'll be having a hearing on that, a joint hearing later today as it relates between the Ag Committee and Financial Services to put that framework in place. Because, again, having that clarity for the regulators is really important. So I think Atkins is going to do a great job at the SEC, Hester Peirce and others who are engaged in this. But we have to plan this for years to come. And so while I currently think the new SEC commissioner is going to do a great job, there could be an SEC commissioner in the future that I hold in the same regard as I did to Gary Gensler.
Well, let's pivot a bit and talk about one of your other priorities, which is talking about earned wage access. This is an interesting issue. This is an issue where essentially, this is the idea that you could, as an employee, get access to your salary before your typical payment, like a biweekly check. And its advocates say, okay, this is money you've earned, this is money you deserve. And critics would say this is concerning. Maybe it's a little bit too almost like loan sharky. Like you're an advocate, if I understand it. Why?
Well, let's step back. If we went in this room, we all went to work 150 years ago. Most of that work was lower skilled labor 150 years ago, but almost everybody got paid at the end of the day. So if you went and worked and you carried a sack of potatoes around and you busted your butt, you got paid at the end of the day. And if you didn't, there's probably a fist fight about it. We then enter into a new era with huge ERP systems, very complicated payroll structures, and people started getting paid every week, every 2 weeks, every month. Many people in DC, a lot of people in my home state of Wisconsin are getting paid only every month. And so when we think about people's need for cash, how do we allow you to actually connect the labor of your work with the reward of that financial payment? And in some industries, you can do that. So if you're a bartender, a waiter, or a waitress, and you want to pick up an extra shift on Friday because you need an extra $200, you can pick up an extra shift and you will probably go home at the end of the night with $100 or $200 in your pocket for whatever that need is.
Cash.
In cash. If you are working at the same place and say you are washing dishes and you're only paid every 2 weeks and you have the exact same need as the bartender and you want to pick up that same Friday or Saturday night shift, you might have to wait not only 2 weeks, but you might have to wait even longer for that to actually get that cash in your pocket. So what I think it actually does is frees people up from the need for the loan shark, for the challenging environment that people find themselves in, and creates an opportunity where people can actually get access to the money they already earned. And so putting in place a regulatory framework for this, again, provides those consumer protections to make sure that people aren't being abused, just as the theoretical risk was posed. But also, I think it really enhances the core concept of work, which is you're working to obtain an economic benefit, and the closer we tie that together, I think the better off we are.
Earned wage access seems like a close relative to me of buy now, pay later, which is of course accelerating, and we've seen, for example, DoorDash now offering buy now, pay later. You shook your head. It seems like you probably would. I mean, how do you feel about buy now, pay later, and the fact that it's becoming a much more prominent thing for American consumers?
I think there's going to be all sorts of different innovative ways to allow people to finance purchases. I don't think that's inherently problematic, but I don't think it's a good analogy to earned wage access at its core. Because again, earned wage access is about you having access to the money that you earned. And so individuals that work and are salaried often have a mindset that's a lot different than people that are working for an hourly wage. And so I think that's some of the disconnect, is a lot of people who are paid on a salary basis, in particular, high net worth individuals, or kind of many of them, high net worth individuals, are floating along and saying, I'll balance my books at the end of the month. A lot of other people, the vast majority of Americans, are thinking through about what can I afford this month, and connecting people to the economic benefit of their labor in real time, I think actually allows people, again, to pick up that extra shift at work, to make sure that they can meet the economic needs that are in front of them, but to do it and avoid a lot of the financing options that are out there.
We have only a few minutes left. One issue I'm curious if you've been involved in or thinking about at all, because it is related to digital assets, it's definitely a relative in a way, is the prediction markets and what's happening there. The CFTC, which of course you have an eye on, is supposedly considering whether to allow prediction markets in sports event contracts, which would effectively allow sports betting nationwide, although they would argue that it's not sports betting. Have you thought about that issue at all? How do you feel about it?
I was talking actually just the other day to Dusty Johnson on this, who chairs the Agriculture Committee's subcommittee in this space that oversees the CFTC. I think there's going to be some interesting rulemaking and analysis in this. The other aspect here as we step out, though, is I think we also have to be mindful that we have to look at regulation and recognize we're in a global environment. And so a lot of these prediction markets, a lot of these things are occurring offshore if we don't put a regulatory framework for them to occur onshore. We saw that in particular in the broader digital assets crypto space. By putting our US head in the sand, what we were really doing was pushing a lot of this innovation and development offshore. But as it relates to the prediction markets, I know the Ag Committee's digging deep into this.
What about election betting? Like, what do you think about someone betting on your campaign?
Again, I think it goes back to what regulatory framework would you put in place to prevent such a thing. But if you are betting on my race, bet for me.
All right, that's inside information, it sounds like to me. Yeah, I mean, the CFTC is in a transition period, as I understand it, and the president has nominated, I believe, a permanent chair. But that organization has been very quiet about how they're doing things right now. In fact, they just put out a press release the other day saying they suspended some staff members. It didn't say why. What does the future of the CFTC look like?
They're going to have, I think, a lot of good hearings over in the Agriculture Committee, and so we're going to see a lot of that play out. But I think broadly, as we look at the regulatory environment under President Trump, I think we have a huge opportunity to be embracing innovation and development here in the United States. And so Acting Director Pham, I think, has done a great job out of the gates. I think we have a big opportunity, though, to make sure that we're right-sizing a lot of our regulations and being forward-looking. And so the CFTC, along with the SEC, has been great partners in drafting our legislation as it relates to digital assets. And so we survived 4 years where the regulators were really pushing back against us, not being helpful, not being constructive in drafting really important legislation that we get right. We have seen a significant shift at the CFTC and at the SEC to truly embrace the work that we're doing and provide that essential technical advice.
So at Axios, we always like to end these conversations with one fun thing. And I want to read something that you wrote in a recent op-ed. You said, quote, "We want the next wave of entrepreneurs and startups to emerge not in boardrooms and law firms, but in basements and dorm rooms." And my question is, what kind of innovation was happening in your dorm room?
That was like early on in Web 2. There was I'll give you a nugget. There was this thing where you could run an ad on the bottom of your computer, and so freshman year of college, early 2000s, you could run ads on the bottom of your computer, and you got paid directly. I'm seeing like one person nod that maybe has any knowledge of what I'm doing. The business model clearly didn't work because, of course, you figured out how to make your mouse continually move running a program, and they would pay you to watch ads. Of course, I didn't do that. Somebody else might have in the dorm room area. But it was all about that beginning of Web 2, where you finally left having to pay AOL your $30 or $50 a month, and all of a sudden you could plug your computer right into the wall. That shift occurred my freshman year. I mean, it started where you were borrowing your parents' AOL dial-up and ended by the end of first semester where you were on a full-blown Ethernet cable. And it was revolutionary. And so everybody was trying to figure out tech and trying to figure out how to monetize it. And I look at other people and think, boy, if I had invented Facebook, we would have been doing a little better financially.
Well, at least you've been thinking about the future of fintech for quite a long time. That is all the time we have today. I want to thank everyone here for coming, and please don't hesitate to sign up for my newsletter, Axios Closer, axios.com/newsletters. And thank you also to Congressman Stile.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.